It's 2024. Do we care about Horizon yet?
Hey! Horizon's good!
You think with the amount of remasters and spin-off Lego projects, that yes, it would be unilaterally accepted that it is good. And it is good, but at the same time, I feel like it is a franchise worth talking about in regards to the overall pull of the IP, because Sony are moving forward with an online version of the game. In theory, it's something like a Monster Hunter. There is leaked footage out there. It was a good couple of years ago of a prototype version of Horizon Online. And we have a new quote from Jason Schreier, who was speaking on the Spawnwave podcast, or on Spawnwave's podcast, saying Horizon Online is their next project, as in Guerrilla, the developers, not the third single-player game, that being Horizon 3. So that one may be a ways off. Sony PlayStation's live service initiative was no joke. Everybody was like, it's live service games all around. Horizon is one of the few ones that hasn't been cancelled or hasn't come out and flopped the way Concord did. So yeah, it's a lot of questions. A lot of people are working on that. Do you want to shoot the bow on the dinosaur main again?
You know what? I feel like you've woken up today and chosen violence for this video. I wasn't expecting this.
It chose me. I woke up and went, it's into me.
Honestly, like Jason Schreier was explaining there, I don't like Sony's previous live service pivot. I think it's kind of crazy that they got all of their studios, primarily known for single-player games, to make live service versions of their most famous franchises. That always seemed like a strange thing to do. But if this is one that has survived, I am confident, or at least cautiously optimistic, that it might be good. Because, like Schreier mentions, like they have not been, they have not shied away from cancelling these projects now that the approach to live service has clearly internally shifted, with Jim Ryan, the ex-CEO, leaving and the two core CEOs coming in. So if the likes of The Last of Us Factions got cancelled, if the likes of Spider-Man The Great Web, which was leaked earlier this year, got cancelled, among other things, I mean, I'm actually interested to see what they have done with Horizon Online, because like you said, that Monster Hunter idea of you and your friends teaming up to take down these big beasts, I don't think that's inherently bad. I think it's not. Potentially cool in that idea.
Very much am doing a bit for the sake of retention on YouTube in the first 15 seconds, you might say. But also, I think it's worth having this conversation because of how much Sony themselves are steering into this stuff. I did not see a Horizon Lego game coming, for one.
No.
And also, if you're going to do, which projects are worth keeping after the great kill-off of the last year or so in regards to their other live service titles, doing their own, let's say their own Monster Hunter, or at least that seems like that's the way that this project's going to play based on the leaked footage, which we can't include in the video, but it did show, I think it was up to 4 different players running around the field together, and it seemed very Monster Hunter-y in regards. That is kind of the way that you would structure something like this. That points to a Sony that, alongside something like the Ghost of series, like you've done Tsushima, you're going to do Yote, doing first-party versions of wider third-party successes, which I think is interesting. Something like the Ghost of series being their version of Assassin's Creed, and then if you want to do a wider live service version of Horizon, that then can become a first-party version of Monster Hunter, something that on Capcom's side is their biggest, most successful title ever now, after how big Monster Hunter Worlds did, and then the DLC, and Monster Hunter Wilds is coming up. So I see it through that lens to a degree. And I do think it's interesting what Schreier says about how every single team was sort of, in the wider podcast, it was put onto this idea of what can you make a live service game out of? And like Josh said, they were working on a live service Spider-Man. I've always said that the add-on modes there in The Last of Us 2 Remastered and God of War Ragnarok's DLC, Valhalla, feel like what would have been live service versions of The Last of Us, and a live service version of God of War, that roguelike mode that you just run over and over again and then get currency, you pay for skins and whatever. So it's a dark path that they've largely then stepped back away from. But it all comes down to the viability of Horizon being the one thing they keep. Like this versus when you've cancelled The Last of Us and Spider-Man, it's fascinating how much they love Horizon.
Yes,
and think this is the one thing that everyone's going to go crazy for, and that's what I don't feel.
First off, sorry if you can hear loads of banging. I don't know what's going on downstairs.
They've come for me.
It sounds like the entire office is caving in.
Yes.
But yeah, too, it is fascinating to see it with Horizon. And I think a lot of people write it off. I think people say that it's like, and I know you said this, Scott, this is not me jamming the knife into you after the start of this video. I'll try to take it out.
I put it in myself.
When, people refer to it as kind of like the Horizon, another Horizon, the avatar of the gaming world, in that it's somehow incredibly successful, but no one really talks about. Yet all I see are people talking about it. Not necessarily good things, but people are always talking about Horizon, whether they like it, whether they don't like it, whether it deserves its position. The games sell well. And I think what made it click for me is that Horizon is one of the only, but definitely the main first-party IP that isn't licensed from somewhere else, like Spider-Man, that appeals to all ages. Yes. Like most of their other big franchises that are currently going kind of have that more mature edge. Maybe not like to the complete level of The Last of Us, which is definitely like 18 plus in terms of its violence and maturity and gore and everything else. But, even God of War, which is maybe less so than that, it's still incredibly violent. Still deals with mature themes. It's not to say that Horizon isn't mature, but it definitely, and I think you can see this with its placement within Astrobot and its upcoming Lego game, it has that broader appeal. You can be a young teen and play it. You can be an older gamer and play it and still enjoy it. So I think Sony is very much looking to mine that. Sometimes that feels a bit too aggressive, perhaps. Because we are getting the Lego game, we're getting the remaster, they're trying to spin it off into live action as well. They're trying to make it this multimedia franchise, right? And I can see that comes across as too aggressive. I guess in wrestler parlance, it's like when you notice something being pushed too much and you kind of turn against it because it doesn't feel authentic, right? But I don't think Horizon is even on its own in that regard. Like every Sony franchise right now is being pushed so hard. Like they are making a God of War TV show. We're getting those additional modes for those release games. We've had about 9 versions of The Last of Us in its many forms. We're getting the remake for this. So it's definitely like a sort of push across the board. Yeah. And I know Sony gets flack for it as a wider company, but I always find it interesting that people single out Horizon as opposed to something else. I don't know.
I think it's because, I think the Horizon gets singled out because, there's a few things to this. Yeah, I think it gets singled out because of the fact that it's getting the remaster, or just like, for me, how empty Forbidden West felt. Like, we talk about the idea of the maturity association with Sony first-party titles, which came for the first Last of Us, and then it felt like they then Last of Us a lot of their other first-party stuff, like God of War, give them a companion character, do a Last of Us with God of War, which worked magnificently well. I love 2018's God of War. However, with Horizon, I feel like Zero Dawn was a more mature title and had more mature talking points to it and a more mature philosophy to it, and it felt like a better, more believable sense of place, whereas Forbidden West felt like you were then aiming for the mass audience, where you suddenly had NPCs and various other characters that you were talking to who had a tonality that was a lot more Disneyfied, MCU-ified, like a lot more friendly, or whatever the hell you want to call it. I felt like everyone in Forbidden West talked with a parlance that would fit the modern day and didn't feel like they lived in that world anymore. And I kind of bounced off Forbidden West. And that's where my core of like the dislike of where they've went with the series kind of comes from. I adore Zero Dawn. I didn't really like Forbidden West that much. So I think it's that. I think Horizon kind of gets focused on as just, it's like the Avatar thing. Yeah. Like it eventually sold more than Zero Dawn over time, but its initial sales weren't there. And it's like, it's interesting. And some of that comes from the disastrous marketing decisions. They keep putting it up against Zelda or against something else on the same day, which was Zero Dawn's the problem as well. But yeah, the way that they've kind of pushed forward with it, where it's like, we've got the Lego game, we're going to do Horizon Online, you've got the remaster of Zero Dawn, which is only 7 years old, and you've said, Last of Us got remasters, Last of Us 2 got a remaster, and that's only 4 years old, so that it should be in the firing line too. But something about the Horizon IP feels a little bit too much like set dressing without the meaty core to it. And some of that for me is character-based, some of it is world-based. I thought they kind of lost the thread after Zero Dawn, and the way the story goes in Forbidden West gets... I like the question posed at the end, but it's way more ridiculous, and we can just do this forever kind of thing.
No, I think, I think you've made some very great points. There's some valid points there, Scott Tilford, especially because I don't necessarily disagree that they did pivot towards that wider audience with the second game, because I do think they kind of realized that, Horizon is our... franchise that is a bit able to get in that wide audience, and why not make it as pleasant as possible and as accessible as possible in that regard. I didn't mind that necessarily. I thought I didn't love the story of Forbidden West, but I didn't find it a marked step down compared to Zero Dawn personally. And I thought Zero Dawn was pretty good, and I thought Forbidden West was pretty good. Right. All this is to say that if we're talking about the wider brands, Horizon is definitely at the bottom of the modern Sony crop. But I kind of want to preface that by saying that being at the bottom of the modern Sony crop still means you're a very good 4 out of 5 game, right? In my eyes, anyway. I really enjoyed my time with Forbidden West, even if it was missing that sort of killer edge that some of the other sequels have had since the release. But you will let me, I will circle it back around to what you said about 100 hours ago when we were talking about the Monster Hunter comparisons.
Oh, yeah.
This is why I think it's quite a nice fit, though, because I do think the world of Horizon is distinct enough to allow it to not just feel like a derivative, if that makes sense, because I do think you've got a lot going for you when you add multiplayer to the Horizon world. Like, say what you will about the games, they are some of the most, at least, luscious looking open worlds you can get, like, on console. Like, the play space of Forbidden West and its Burning Shores, I think it was called, the DLC. Absolutely lush, man.
Oh, yeah,
All the
yeah.
interactable elements, the way the enemy campments are placed, the ability to go underwater, all of these different modes of navigation. And I think if you throw a few people in the loop and kind of have the same basic quest structure, because let's face it, the quests in Horizon aren't that advanced. Like, if you throw another person in, you don't break them, you don't have to change much. It's not like, I don't know, it's something like The Last of Us, where it is so kind of laser focused and linear that adding multiple players in will maybe break the flow. Yeah, they are open-ended by design. It is a big open world, and we've seen the likes of Monster Hunter, or even something like Far Cry embrace co-op and kind of not really lose much from the core identity or core structure. So in that sense, I do think this makes more sense than something like a God of War or even a Spider-Man to make that a multiplayer step.
I am curious to how it sits in the wider brand, because assumedly the sort of the general swath of all the decisions that were made internally, like assumedly that's done now. Like Concord flopped, they cancelled Last of Us, they cancelled Spider-Man. Assumedly what we're going forward with is what will remain. Like, when they cancelled Last of Us, there were various reports of the fact that heads will roll in regards to how far along that project was. So you would assume they don't then do that for this project, because as of this podcast, Schreier is still saying that's one of the only titles that maintained.
Yeah.
But in terms of where that then sits in Horizon, to me it's like, yeah, tell Aloy's story. I love Aloy as a character. I love where she started out in Zero Dawn. I want to see what happens there. And then you've kind of earned the wider favor to be like, now we're going to spin this off, as opposed to we're going to get in there when there's still a bit of momentum and we're going to do all this different stuff, which reminds me of the general live service push, which is we're going to hit you with the premium currencies, the unlocks, the skin packs, the level packs, everything else before we've even justified that you even care in the first place.
I can only disagree without extending this to podcast length for the news. I would say, what else do they have to do to establish themselves? They've had two main blockbuster games. They've got two main blockbuster games.
Yeah.
They've got an upcoming remaster.
Carry on.
They've got a Lego version. They've got a VR version.
Which no one bought.
No, but it's not the point. It's not the point. The point is, how can they establish themselves more than that? Like, why do you need to have an arbitrary number of 3 games before you can start doing multiplayer stuff?
No,
or what have you?
You don't have to have an arbitrary amount of games. It's just something to pick at in regards to why it might be the case that the general some of the reception online in regards to Horizon is that they are running before they've proved that they can walk far enough, kind of thing. The idea that they are going down the franchising route as fast as possible. Like you said, the TV show, doing the online mode, everything else, without finishing Aloy's story in the first place. Mass Effect didn't get multiplayer until Mass Effect 3 when we were finishing the story. Then it's like, hey, if you want to play more, it's over here. So I think that's an interesting part of this, because it is a wider conversation. Why is Horizon not a 10 out of 10 slam dunk, like something like The Last of Us, God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, or whatever the hell is? That's kind of like an ongoing part of this. But in terms of the pivot for the franchise, Horizon is the thing we're going to do a live mode for. It pushes part 3 back a good few years, and we'll see whether or not this actually manages to survive. Is it Helldivers 2, or is it another Concord?